Thank you very much, Leo, for the introduction. And the previous speaker talked about the Nikon digital SLR cameras, which I also own, but I take those only when I do serious photography. So when I have time, when I am dedicated, going out to do some photographs. There's that saying that almost everybody knows, the best camera is the one you have with you. And what do you have with you? The cell phone. And looking back about 20 years, so my company produces test equipment for cameras, and we also test for magazines, but also for VCX, as Vijay introduced. So we test these things and look what is the image quality, what is the usage of these devices. And over the 20 plus years, of course, the quality of the cell phone images has changed dramatically. And so has the number of the cell phones and the cameras that are out there in cell phones. So right now, we estimate that we have more than 6 billion people in the world that own a cell phone. And if you look at the number of pictures that they take, it's more than 1.8 trillion photographs per year. That means the equivalent of 54,000 images every second. So the majority of all the images that are captured these days is captured with cell phones. And the interesting thing is, when you look at these pictures, almost none of them is just a single image, a single capture. Almost all of these images are created computationally out of a multiple number of pictures. Let's look into the detail why that is the case. Of course, the important thing, or the big difference that you see when you look into a DSLR camera, is that a DSLR camera is big. It's big, bulky, heavy. You carry it. You don't want to carry it around. Of course, when you do serious photography, you may, but typically you want the camera that is with you to be very lightweight and to be small. And that's what typically happens when you have a camera and a cell phone. But that means we have to shrink everything, the optics, the sensors, etc. And that means the pixels that we have are smaller than 1 micron. So 1/1000th of a millimeter, so 1/100000th of a meter. And that means we have to have additional technology. And we actually bring the physics to its borders when we use optics together with cell phone. So we have to have higher resolution optics in order to get high quality images. But that also comes with some what we call larger depths of field. I'll show you what that means. And also means that for every pixel, since it gets smaller, the area that gets the light, that gets the photons, is getting smaller, and that means the sensitivity of the camera is going down. And that creates or created the problems that we saw in the very early cell phones. We had noisy images. Some of them were not high resolution because the number of pixels was very low in order to keep them relatively big and to keep the image quality at a certain level. So that is what a camera of a cell phone looks like, of course, in a big enlargement here. So we have a lot of components that are very small that fit into that tiny, neat little camera that you have in front of your cell phone. And believe it or not, if you talk to those engineers that had to design these cameras for the cell phones, they were fighting for each little millimeter of the camera and the lens they put in front of that. And in the early days, especially companies like Apple, they did not allow any big cameras and big lenses in front of that. If you look at an iPhone now, you see those lenses sticking out. So they got a few millimeters, and that helped them a lot to get better image quality, to design better cell phone cameras. So, talked about the depth of field. On the left-hand side, you see an example for a very small depth of field. So when you have something in front of you on the table, and you have a DSLR camera with a large sensor, you see that the foreground is not sharp, the background is not sharp, and only the object that you focus on, that is sharp. And if you look at an image captured with a cell phone, you see that almost everything from the front to the back is sharp, which can be beneficial, especially if you use macro photography, etc. You always get sharp images, and everything is in focus. But it's not always what you want, especially from an artistic point of view. So sometimes you want that behavior of a DSLR camera, and we'll look into that. The other thing is the smaller pixels, the lower image quality. Unfortunately, with that small image and with the lighting here, you cannot see much. This is a pretty noisy picture, and all the details that you see in the upper picture is gone because of the noise in the image. I'll show you another example later on where you see that in more depth. So actually, that was all the problems that the manufacturers were facing when they started to build cameras into cell phones. So at first, what they actually had to do was solving those problems, getting high resolution, getting the higher image quality, and they started to think about how can those problems be solved. So one thing is image stabilization. So when you have low sensitivity, it automatically means that you have to use a longer exposure time. And that means your images get blurry because of your handshake. So that's something the manufacturers integrated. So they use something like this here, this element, that compensates the human handshake. So it's an optical image stabilizer that is built into those cameras to make the images better when you have to use longer exposure times. Another thing what they did is they use multiple images. So if you look at one image here, you hardly see anything on this image. But if you take 20 or 30 of these images and you combine them computationally, you get to actually an image where you can see something on. And then if you combine that image with denoising technologies, you actually get to an acceptable image quality. So that's one thing that they added to those cameras in order to get to better images. The first time, you can actually see it's not a single image. It's multiple images that are combined to one image in order to get to a better image quality. Another thing, when you have those small pixels, you don't get a lot of photons that it can count. And that means the contrast range the camera is able to capture from dark to bright is very low. So next time you increase the number of images that a camera captures, you take one standard exposure, and then you take some underexposed images, potentially also some overexposed images, and combine them to a single image that actually has the dynamic range that you are looking for. So another time when there's multiple images used in order to get to good image quality. Right now here we call it adaptive dynamic range, and actually what it means is that the camera captures the contrast range that is present. So sometimes if you are at home and you take a picture of your loved ones, the dynamic range is not that huge. It may be okay, and you can capture it with a single image. But if you, for example, go outside and you have the sun somewhere in your image, and then you have a darker foreground, etc., you have a huge dynamic range. And what those cameras do these days is they actually analyze what is the dynamic range, what is the contrast I have in the scene that I'm going to capture, And that way the camera judges, am I going to take a single image or am I going to take multiple images and combine them in order to get to an image that captures the whole scene in an accurate way. So another thing is, after solving all those problems, getting to the dynamic range, getting rid of the noise, getting to high resolution, etc., those companies also looked for what can we do in order to make things even better and to take things a step further. And as mentioned before, with the depth of field, oftentimes when you take pictures of loved ones, kids, etc., what you want to have is you want to have the face that is sharp and the background, the foreground, not being sharp, because then the object, the person, stands out more than if it is within a sharp, fully sharp range. So this is an image with the kids here in the foreground. I borrowed those from my partner. So it's his kids, and you see the background is also sharp. And then if you want to actually these kids to stand out in the image, you want the background to be unsharp. And that's what you get these days with the portrait mode when you use your iPhone, etc. They can be set to portrait mode, and that's what they try to do there. And what are the cameras doing? They are actually creating what we call a depth map. So they try to find out what is in which plane, in which distance from the camera. And as you can see here, the mouth and the face of this young boy is in the foreground, and then this is further away from the camera. So the darker the color gets, the further away the object is from the camera. And this can be generated in different ways. And if you look at your cell phone, you have two different cameras typically. You have the front-facing camera and you have the back-facing camera. Front-facing camera means the camera that you use to take selfies with yourself in the foreground. So it typically captures images at very small distances. The back-facing camera is actually taking the pictures that are out there in the world. And those cameras use different technologies in order to generate these depth maps. So the front-facing camera is actually using oftentimes an infrared LED that projects some sort of structure onto your face, and then the infrared camera that is beside the actual camera will capture your face, and it can detect your face. You can also use that to unlock your phone. It's so accurate with the face detection that is not a security risk. The back-facing camera that actually captures the pictures out there in the world is using different technologies. They can do a focus stack and see which part of the image is in focus at what distance, and that way create a depth map and find out what is in the foreground, what is in the background. And then in the early days, and for some cameras it's still the case, they were causing some problems. For example, here the camera did not accurately detect where is the hair of this little girl. So the background here is sharp, whereas the background in this area is not sharp. Or here the guy with the glasses, you see that some part of the glasses is gone, and it doesn't look that nice. Or here this little boy is hanging in the air because these areas are unsharp, so the camera did not an accurate job on detecting the different structures and the different distances. But nowadays, cameras actually store a lot of additional information, a lot of additional images. So actually one image, and you can extract these images. If you have an iPhone, you can take an image in the HEIC format, and you can extract these images from your iPhone. You actually take a look at that. So here, only the glasses are detected. Here, only the teeth are detected. This is the skin area, and this is the hair area. So there are different images that are stored together with the original image in order to identify different types of objects in different areas of the image. And these images are actually used to compute the final image. So another thing that we see is, or that for a long time was lacking, was the capability to zoom. So until just a few years ago, that was the major difference between a digital SLR camera and a cell phone, was that with an SLR camera I could change the lenses and I can actually have a tele lens attached to it and capture something far away. And in the cell phones, this was not possible. Nowadays, almost every cell phone has more than just one camera, and that means this capability has been added to the cell phones, not by adding a big bulky lens, but by adding several cameras with the different optics implemented. And this is an example. So this is an optics that only use digital zoom to get to the details of an object far away from the camera, and then with an optical zoom you get much better image quality, and also the processing for images, night scenes, etc., has been enhanced, and that was also by adding additional images captured at different exposures and been computed together. So that's the standard stuff that's going on. But nowadays, there's a lot of artificial intelligence going on in the cell phones that we don't really recognize as such. For example, a cell phone is currently able to detect scene types, like landscape, portrait, food, etc. And those images are actually processed differently in the camera. And if, for example, a camera detects a portrait image with a highlighted background, so somebody who's sitting in front of a window, it actually exposes the face correctly and therefore creates a lot better images than a lot of the older DSLRs. Nowadays, DSLRs have also implemented some of these technologies, and the images of those are also getting better. So we adjust the exposure, sometimes adjust the illumination. So with some of those cameras, you can modify the lighting after the image capture in order to make it nicer and better looking. And then the color processing also depends on what you're actually capturing. For example, if there's a skin tone, nobody wants to look pale or reddish. Skin tones can be easily enhanced and are easily enhanced in the cell phones. And then we have the object detection, so that's the general scene type, and then the object detection, if there's a person there are animals there, for example, the focusing can be done on certain objects. And as mentioned, some of the DSLR manufacturers have also adapted these technologies. So the Sony cameras, for example, are also able to focus on the eyes of dogs and cats if they detect them as such. So we use the identification to actually unlock an iPhone or a cell phone. We use tonal correction in order to make it better looking. As mentioned, the backlight situation. The focus is done especially on the object that is important, and so on and so forth. So those are all technologies that we have out there. The question is, what is going to come? So what will we see in the future? So one thing is multispectral images, or imaging. What does that mean? So typically, today, we get RGB images. They're converted into CMYK if you look into the printing technology that we see here. But in some cases, it is interesting to not just have RGB, but to also add, for example, near infrared to it, and then you can get smoother skin. in portrait images, for example. Because in IR, all the little dots and so on that we have in our skin tone go away, and it makes the images look nicer. We will improve the facial recognition, which is already pretty good in today's cameras. We may have multiple front-facing cameras that can capture different things in different aspects, not just my face, but also the background, like a wide angle combined with my face in it. We'll have improved video and zoom quality, so that'll further continue to evolve. Then we have low light improvements, which is also, in most cases, so already very good. We may have additional sensors. As mentioned, right now we have that IR sensor with a light projector, the IR light projector, to identify people. And some of these things may be added in the future in various directions to improve what we can do here. Maybe, for example, a LiDAR piece of camera that, for the back-facing camera, is able to detect the distance of an object more accurately at longer distances. We will have virtual reality, somewhat of some kind in the future, I'm pretty sure. And one thing is, we are going to have real HDR. So real high dynamic range, and I'm pretty sure, well, this is not an HDR monitor, and you will not be able to see any HDR in this environment here. But believe me, if you would see this image on a high dynamic range display, this would really stand out because of the light coming from this area with all the detail that you can see in that image. And that is something that is going to be the future in cameras. We already have it, so most of you already carry an HDR display with them because the newer cell phones all have HDR displays, the OLED displays, etc. And they can display these images even better than a standard computer display that you may have in your office. But the problem we're facing when a camera is able to capture these images, capture these objects, how can we store these? How can we display these? And how can we be backward compatible? Because when you print this image on a standard paper, as you see here, you cannot print HDR. Well, there are technology, well, I'm not going to go into detail with that. Typically, you print on paper, and you look at these images. And that means you cannot print an HDR image. You can only print an SDR image. And therefore, the current standards organization is thinking about how can this be stored in a way that we can be backward compatible. So actually what's going to happen is you store the HDR image and you store the SDR image. Actually, you're not storing both of them, you're storing just one of them, plus what we call a gain map that gets you from one to the other. So most cameras these days will store an SDR image in addition with the gain map, which is basically just an amplification map. And if you multiply that image with that gain map, you get to the HDR image. And that's what we will see in the near future happening in cell phones and in cameras. It's already there in prototypes, but not in the broad range. But then we will also see HDR displays, and most of your televisions, if you bought them within the last 2 to 3 years, are HDR televisions already, but they don't know how to deal with HDR still images. Most of them are already able to display HDR video that you can get from YouTube or other sources, but the still images they don't know how to handle, and that's going to change in the future. But that's something that's on the way, that's not done yet. So that's future technology that's about to come. And that concludes my talk for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.